Hello and welcome back to our deep dive. I hope you're sitting comfortably right now.
Yeah, maybe with the lights dim just a little bit.
Definitely. Because today we are heading into some truly fascinating, maybe even slightly spooky territory.
Oh, it gets way beyond slightly spooky.
Right. We are going back to upstate New York, specifically looking at the period between April 1967 and July 1968.
Which, was an incredibly turbulent time out in the wider world. You had the Summer of Love happening, the Vietnam War was really ramping up, political assassinations.
But inside this one specific apartment in Elmira, New York, the vibe was, well, things were getting intensely weird.
Weird is a great word for it. We are talking about the apartment of Jane Roberts and Rob Butts.
Yes, today we are cracking wide open the early sessions book 8 of the Seth Material.
Covering sessions 334 through 421.
And before we get into the details, and I mean the actual levitating tables and literal voices from the future, we have a mission today. We are tracking a major shift in the source material.
Right. A shift from pure philosophical dictation to active physical experimentation.
Yeah.
Exactly. But first, we do need to get our mandatory disclaimer out of the way. This podcast will be distributed free of charge on all major platforms for educational purposes. We are just here to explore these concepts with you, not to sell anything.
And we absolutely have to give a massive, massive credit to the publisher, New Awareness Network.
And, of course, the immense historical work of Robert Butts and Jane Roberts.
Oh, for sure. If Rob hadn't been sitting there meticulously scribing these notes night after night, even when things got completely bizarre, we simply wouldn't have these records.
And if you are listening to this and you want to really get into the weeds, we strongly encourage you to study the Seth Material books yourself.
You really should. You can visit the New Awareness Network website and bookstore at sethcenter.com/the early sessions.
That is where the real deep magic is. We are just giving you the guided tour today.
So book 8, in our previous deep dives, we usually talk about Seth as this energy personality essence.
You're right. Dictating heavy philosophy through Jane while she's in a trance.
Yeah, very verbal, very intellectual stuff. But book 8 is where the whole vibe just changes.
It stops being a lecture hall and completely becomes a laboratory.
A laboratory. That is the perfect way to put it.
Because suddenly you don't just have theory. You have physical phenomena happening right in the living room. Table tipping, Jane's voice completely altering real-world predictions.
It's like Seth was saying, okay, you guys have the theory down. Now let's test the actual hard mechanics of how reality works.
The literal architecture of reality.
Okay.
Which brings us right into the first major theme of this book, the mechanics of creation.
Yes, inner versus outer reality. And we are not just talking about some vague, think positive, self-help stuff here.
No, Seth gets incredibly mechanical about it. Let's look at session 334. This was recorded April 12th, 1967.
He opens with this analogy that is honestly the master key to the whole book. He says, quote, "If you paint a picture, its overall quality comes from the inner atmosphere of your being."
He was speaking to Rob, who is an artist, but he's applying it to everything. He's saying your physical environment is the painting.
The room you're sitting in right now, the events that happened to you today, that is the canvas.
Right. And he says the physical self seems to react to physical stimuli. Actually, of course, it is reacting to its own reality, projected outward.
Let's unpack that because it's a huge concept.
Yeah.
We normally think, okay, if I pinch you, you say, ouch. The physical thing caused the reaction.
But Seth flips that entirely on its head. He's saying objects and events are symbols. They're the end result of an inner state, not the cause of it.
There is this really relatable example he gives about getting a letter in the mail.
Oh, yeah, the annoying letter.
Right. You go to the mailbox, you get a letter with bad news. Maybe it's a huge bill you weren't expecting or a rejection of some kind. Naturally, you get upset.
And you think the letter caused the upset.
But Seth says no. He says if you react negatively, that negative quality actually preceded the letter and caused it to materialize.
You broadcast the negative feelings, which literally attracted the letter.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate here for a second, because that is a really tough pill to swallow.
It is a very tough pill.
Like, are you saying if I get a random medical bill in the mail today, I somehow consciously broadcast a signal for it? I didn't even know it was coming.
Well, he isn't saying you consciously sat there thinking, oh, I really hope I get a massive bill today.
Right.
He is talking about your overall psychic climate.
Psychic climate. That sounds like a fancy way of saying a mood.
It's way deeper than a mood. A mood is temporary. You get mad in traffic and then you forget it. A psychic climate is like the foundational barometric pressure of your consciousness.
Okay.
It's the sustained electromagnetic signal you are putting out into the world based on your deep gut-level expectations and beliefs.
So if my underlying climate is dialed to, say, constant low-level anxiety or a fear of financial ruin,
Then you are essentially a walking radio tower broadcasting that specific frequency, and the physical world is just the receiver.
wow. So the bad newsletter isn't a random attack from the universe. It's just physical proof of the feeling I was already carrying around.
Exactly. It's not a punishment. It's just mental physics.
That is honestly kind of terrifying. It means the upset already lived inside me. The letter is just the shadow cast by my own mind.
It can be scary, sure. But think about the flip side. If you created the climate that brought the thunderstorm, you also have the power to change the thermostat.
You're not just a victim of the Postal Service, you're the architect.
Right. Which brings up a very practical and kind of funny real-world example they dealt with in session 335.
Oh, poor Rob in his car.
Yes, Rob, or Joseph, as Seth calls him, is totally stressed out. His car is breaking down. He's worried about money. He's spiraling into this very human panic of, I can't afford a new car.
We have all been there. And you would think Seth would offer some comforting words.
Not at all. Seth basically gives him a mechanic's diagnosis of his own mind.
He calls him out completely. He tells Rob, quote, your expectations literally create your life as you know it.
And he points out that Rob's firm belief that he cannot afford the car is the literal physical barrier preventing the car from arriving.
It's the rule of expectation. And I think it's important to clarify here because people often confuse this with basic wishful thinking.
Oh, definitely. The whole I'm going to wish for $1 million and wait for it to drop through the ceiling.
Right. But Seth makes a hard distinction between a wish and an expectation.
You can wish for a reliable car all day long, but if your deep expectation is that you are broke and life is a struggle, the expectation overrides the wish every single time.
Seth actually says your belief otherwise automatically shuts you off so that the necessary climate, the psychic climate, is a barrier to what you want.
It's like trying to grow a palm tree but keeping your greenhouse at 20 degrees. You can wish for the tree to grow, but the climate is fundamentally hostile to it.
That is such a good analogy. And Seth gets a little sassy here. He tells Rob that it is highly impractical to believe the way he does.
Which totally twists the knife. We usually think that worrying about our budget is being realistic and practical.
And Seth is saying, no, worrying is the most impractical thing you can possibly do because you are actively manufacturing the poverty you are afraid of.
It forces you to completely redefine what practical means. If the outer world is just a painting of your inner atmosphere, fixing the car is a temporary band-aid. Fixing the belief is the permanent solution.
Okay, so that covers the mental mechanics.
Yeah.
But as we move into the second section of our deep dive today, the phenomena in that Elmira apartment get very physical.
And very spooky.
Yeah. This is section 2, the spooky stuff. Telekinesis and table tipping. We're looking at sessions 376 and 381 mostly.
Up until this point, the routine was pretty standard. Jane goes into a trance, Seth speaks, Rob writes it down. But suddenly they start experimenting with table tipping.
Which, for anyone who hasn't seen old movies, table tipping is that classic seance setup. A group of people sit around a small table, lightly rest their hands on top, and wait for it to start moving.
It sounds like a cheap parlor trick. And Jane and Rob were intellectuals. They were highly skeptical of this stuff. They invited friends over and tried it almost as a joke.
But the joke ended quickly because the table actually started moving. And we are not just talking about a slight wobble.
No, we are talking about actual levitation, the table coming completely off the floor.
And I love Seth's reaction to this. He's observing them do this, and he acts like a bemused physics professor watching kindergartners discover magnets.
He calls it an amusing diversion.
An amusing diversion. But he's also deadly serious about the implications of what they just did.
Right. He tells them, quote, now you have seen a physical object behave in a manner in which no physical object has a right to behave.
No right to behave.
Mm-hmm.
That phrase is so striking. It breaks the accepted laws of physics.
Yeah.
But how does Seth explain the mechanics of it? Does he say it's ghosts lifting the table?
Not at all, and this is crucial. Seth explains that the intense psychic energy and focus from the people sitting around the table actually changes the molecular construction of the table itself.
The molecular construction, so they're altering the wood.
Yes. He implies that their collective energy changes the density of the object and its relationship to gravity. So it isn't invisible spirits lifting it up. It is the raw energy of living human minds temporarily rewriting the physical rules of that specific object.
It is literal mind over matter.
Exactly. But then things get even stranger, because a personality actually does come through the table
Oh,
movements.
right. By tapping out letters with the table legs? This part gave me genuine chills when I read the transcripts.
You're talking about the AA personality.
Alexander Anere. He taps out that he was a lawyer who died in 1906. And he specifically states he is interested in the manipulation of physical matter.
What's fascinating here is that Seth steps back. He basically lets this AA entity take the wheel of the table to demonstrate the point.
And Rob and Jane note that AA feels completely different from Seth. The energy is different. The pacing is different.
It proves that Jane's channeling ability isn't just a dedicated phone line to one guy named Seth. It's a broad frequency radio that can tune into different stations.
And Seth uses the whole bizarre event to hammer home a huge philosophical point. He says the physical universe is as unpredictable as the behavior of that table.
We walk around thinking reality is solid. Gravity is gravity. Matter is dead. Time only moves forward.
But Seth is proving that if a heavy wooden table can float just because a few people focus their emotional energy on it, then reality is infinitely more fluid than we have been taught.
Exactly. The levitating table is just a heavy, dramatic symbol. If you can lift a table with your mind, you can absolutely shift a career path or heal a relationship dynamic.
It all comes back to the inner climate. But just as they are wrapping their heads around flying furniture, the high strangeness of Book 8 ratchets up to an entirely new level.
Oh yeah, the voice change.
Let's get into Section 3, the arrival of Seth 2. Now, if you're a longtime reader of the material, you are very used to Seth's personality.
Right, Seth 1, as we can call him. He is earthy, he has a booming laugh, he likes to drink wine and smoke cigarettes through Jane's body. He's very relatable.
He's like a favorite eccentric uncle who happens to know the secrets of the universe.
But then, starting around session 406 in early 1968, something shifts. Jane opens her mouth, and the voice that comes out is definitely not the eccentric uncle.
Rob's notes on this are incredible. He describes the voice as being high-pitched, incredibly clear, distant, and lilting.
And it had this weird cadence where the sentences would end on an upbeat, like a musical note.
It sounds almost digital, devoid of the usual human warmth or emotion.
It was pure, unadulterated information. And Jane, when she would come out of the trance or try to describe the feeling of this new voice, she used this visual of a pyramid or a cone.
Can you break that down? Because the visual really helps make sense of what's happening here.
Sure. Jane visualizes this massive cone structure. She feels like her physical consciousness is at the very wide, dense base of the cone.
Okay.
Seth, our regular Seth, is suspended somewhere in the middle, acting like a bridge. And this new voice, this immense presence, is pouring in from the absolute tiny apex at the top.
So it's a hierarchy of consciousness.
Or a focusing lens. Seth explains to them later that this new voice is what he calls Seth's entity.
Meaning it's a future, far more evolved version of himself.
Exactly. He says that the Seth they've been talking to for years is actually just a tiny, focused fragment of this much larger identity.
This honestly breaks my brain a little bit. We are so used to thinking of individuals as single, solid things, but Seth is a part of a bigger Seth.
Think of it like a massive searchlight. The entity at the top is the raw beam, way too bright and intense for a human nervous system to handle directly.
Right.
So Seth 1 acts like a step-down transformer. He filters that blinding light into a softer beam that Jane can safely translate. But occasionally, Seth 2 decides to speak directly, and the sheer power of it completely alters Jane's vocal cords and demeanor.
Seth 2 doesn't care about Rob's car breaking down. Seth 2 is dealing with the fundamental bedrock of existence.
There are some quotes from Seth 2 that are just staggeringly cosmic.
Yeah, let me grab this one. Seth 2 says, quote, "I am the Seth that I say I am, but I am also more. My reality includes the Seth reality."
And then there's the line that always stops me in my tracks. He says, quote, "We taught man to speak before the tongue knew syllables."
That is just wild. We taught man to speak before the tongue knew syllables. It implies this ancient, timeless influence on human evolution.
It suggests humanity has been guided by these massive gestalt intelligences since before we even had physical language.
It completely shifts the scale of what they were doing in that apartment. It goes from a fascinating psychological experiment to exploring the literal history of the human soul.
And it highlights a core Seth concept. the multidimensional self. We sit here thinking, I am just me, locked in this body in this 1 year.
But Seth, too, proves that we are all just the tips of the iceberg. There are larger, perhaps future versions of ourselves that are intimately connected to us right now.
Guiding us, just like Seth 2 guides Seth 1.
Which perfectly bridges into our next topic.
Yeah.
Because if we are connected to future versions of ourselves, it means time is not a straight line.
It means time is an illusion. Which brings us to section 4, precognition and the nature of time.
Yes. We are moving from the high philosophy back into hard, verifiable evidence. Because it is one thing for an entity to claim time is simultaneous. It is another thing entirely to accurately describe a cracked toilet hundreds of miles away.
Yeah. The famous cracked toilet incident. We are back in session 334 for this one.
Let's set the scene for the Gallagher trip.
Right. So Bill and Peg Gallagher are good friends of Jane and Rob. They decide to take a trip down to New York City.
And while they are gone, Seth decides to do a little remote viewing experiment from Elmira.
He basically tunes his consciousness into their trip in real time and starts dictating impressions of what they are experiencing.
And when the Gallaghers come back, Jane and Rob show them the transcript to check the hits and misses.
The hits are incredibly specific. Seth mentioned seeing a green modernistic chair,
which they had in their hotel room.
He described a cracked toilet, and the Gallaghers confirmed their hotel toilet had a very specific crack in the enamel.
He also described them visiting a place with mines, the Navy, and a war.
And it turned out they had visited the Seamen's Church Institute Museum, which featured all of those exact naval and war exhibits.
It is stunning evidence of remote viewing. But what I find even more fascinating are the things Seth seemingly got wrong.
The misses are so instructive.
Yeah.
Because they show how psychic information is filtered.
Right. For instance, Seth mentioned the concept of spies.
And the Gallaghers hadn't met any spies on their trip. So at first glance, it looks like a failed prediction. But Bill Gallagher had spent time in a bookstore specifically looking at spy novels.
So Seth wasn't picking up on a physical spy in the room. He was picking up on the focused thought energy of Bill.
Exactly. To the inner self, a physical spy and the strong thought of a spy carry the same energetic weight. Consciousness does not draw a hard line between a physical event and an imagined one.
Which ties right back into the very first thing we talked about today, the letter. The feeling is the reality. The physical event is just a secondary echo.
It is all interconnected, but precognition in Book 8 isn't just limited to hotel rooms and bookstores. It gets into some very heavy, dark, historical events.
Yeah, sessions 413 and 414. This is June 1968, the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy.
Right as it was happening in the news, Jane and Rob were having sessions about it.
Now, dealing with political events is always tricky, and Seth approaches it not from a partisan angle, but from the perspective of mass energy dynamics.
He doesn't take sides. He analyzes it as a symptom. He says that nations, just like individuals, go through massive emotional cycles.
Just like Rob created a broken car with his personal negative expectations, Seth suggests that a whole country can manifest a violent tragedy through its mass emotional climate.
And during these sessions, Seth was actively trying to tune into the chaotic energy surrounding the assassin, Sirhan, before all the facts were even public.
He starts throwing out these highly specific, slightly garbled details.
Right. He mentions the letters QUA. He mentions a connection to a specific town of 2,000 people.
It really shows the raw process of a consciousness trying to parse information from a highly charged, chaotic collective event.
And the underlying lesson there is profound. We are not isolated actors. My personal bad mood might attract a broken appliance, but our collective anger or fear shapes history.
We are quite literally co-creating reality together on a massive scale.
It is a lot of responsibility.
It is. But I want to pivot to Section 5 now, because as heavy as the assassinations and the cosmic entities are, the actual day-to-day transcripts of Book 8 are incredibly human.
Oh, they are so funny sometimes. Jane was not some serene guru sitting on a mountaintop.
No, she was a stressed-out woman in upstate New York trying to manage a household while channeling the secrets of the universe.
She got tired, she got cranky, and she enjoyed a cold beer.
Which leads us to one of my absolute favorite moments in the entire Seth Material, Session 410, the drinking incident.
It is May 8th, 1968. Jane has had a long day. She drinks a couple of beers. I think Rob noted it was about 2.5 fairly quick ones, right before they were supposed to have a session.
So she sits down in her rocker, goes into her trance state, and Rob gets his pen ready. And Nothing happens.
No booming voice, no deep philosophy, just silence.
But then Jane gets a mental message. Not a verbal dictation, just an inner note. She snaps out of it and recites it to Rob.
Seth basically left them a voicemail saying, I can't let Seth speak in his own voice. I can't hold liquor.
That is just hilarious. This ancient multidimensional entity is like, nope, the medium is tipsy, I'm out.
It's so funny, but scientifically it's really revealing. It proves that the biological chemical state of the medium's nervous system directly impacts the transmission.
Right. If Jane's brain chemistry is depressed by alcohol, the high-frequency signal of Seth simply cannot push through the static.
The hardware was malfunctioning, so the software couldn't run. Seth wasn't angry about it. He was just pragmatic.
He is actually very opinionated about their daily habits in general, like his absolute hatred for their television set.
Oh, the monster screen.
He literally called it the monster screen. He sounds like a modern parent today yelling at their kids about iPad screen time.
He really does. But his reasoning is fascinating. He believed that staring at the television puts a person into a passive hypnotic trance.
And why is that bad in his view?
Because when you are in that passive state, you are constantly absorbing other people's manufactured images and symbols, rather than doing the hard work of generating your own inner reality.
You are letting a broadcast dictate your psychic climate instead of setting the thermostat yourself.
Exactly. And Seth doesn't just critique the TV, he critiques Rob's art.
He acts as Rob's personal art director, but the advice he gives him is universally applicable.
Rob was struggling with the painting. He was getting bogged down in the technique, the brush strokes, the physical medium of the paint itself.
And Seth tells him, quote, stop thinking in terms of the medium.
He says, let the inner vision completely dictate the style. Stop worrying about the how and just focus entirely on the pure what of the vision.
Which is exactly how he tells us to manifest reality. Stop worrying about how the new car is going to get to your driveway and just focus on the pure feeling of having it.
It is exactly the same principle. The universe's job is to figure out the medium, the brushstrokes. Your job is just to hold the vision.
Now, speaking of holding visions and the physical body, there is a shadow that starts to emerge in Book 8 regarding Jane's health.
Yes, we start seeing the early signs of the severe physical symptoms that would plague her later in life. Stiff joints, arthritis-like pain.
And Seth addresses it head on. He doesn't sugarcoat it. He tells Jane that her physical stiffness is a direct, tangible manifestation of her fear of emotional freedom.
Jane was an incredibly disciplined, controlled person. She worked constantly. She repressed a lot of her spontaneous urges.
Seth tells her, quote, concentrate upon freedom. Freedom in emotional states keeps the system clear.
He is explicitly linking the free flow of emotional energy to the free flow of physical fluids and joint mobility in the body. It is psychosomatic in the most literal sense.
The psyche is hardening the soma. The mind is stiffening the body.
And he gives them some wildly specific practical advice to help clear up their energy, like the pillow incident.
Yes. It's such a weird little detail, but it perfectly illustrates how objects hold energy.
Seth suddenly tells Rob that he needs to get rid of a very specific small pillow he uses on his bed.
Because it has a negative connection to Rob's mother.
Right. It's essentially psychometry. The idea that physical objects act like batteries, storing the emotional energy they are exposed to.
So Seth is saying this ordinary pillow is soaked in old, restrictive, negative emotional patterns related to Rob's mother. And by sleeping on it, Rob is basically plugging his subconscious into a toxic battery every single night.
It's infecting his dream state and his daily psychic climate. So Seth just says, throw it out.
Practical, everyday feng shui.
Completely. Whether it's a massive table levitating or just tossing out a bad vibes pillow, the core lesson is identical. Manage your energy.
So we have covered an immense amount of ground today. We started with the mechanics of the inner atmosphere, flew through table tipping, met a future cosmic entity, remote viewed a cracked toilet, and analyzed the dangers of the monster screen.
It is an incredibly dense, rewarding section of the material.
So if we have to synthesize all of this for the listener, what is the ultimate takeaway of Book 8?
I think the main message is that the wall between your inner mind and the outer world is a complete illusion.
We are so trained to believe that our thoughts are safe, private little clouds inside our skulls, and the real world is out there disconnected, just happening to us.
And Book 8 systematically dismantles that belief. The floating table proves that your mind moves dense matter. The remote viewing proves that your mind transcends physical distance.
And the arrival of Seth 2 proves that your identity is vastly larger and more multidimensional than the person looking back at you in the mirror.
It completely removes our ability to play the victim. You are not a passive observer trapped in a chaotic universe.
You are the painter.
You are the painter and the paint and the canvas.
That is a lot to process. And honestly, we have barely scratched the surface of what is contained in these specific sessions.
We truly cannot stress this enough. We strongly encourage you to study the Seth Material books yourself. Reading the transcripts day by day, seeing the evolution of their understanding, there is just nothing else like it out there.
You can find all of this at the New Awareness Network website and bookstore. Just go to sethcenter.com for the early sessions.
It is a treasure map to your own consciousness.
Now, before we go, I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative thought to chew on.
I love these. Hit me.
We spent time talking about Seth 2 today, this massive, evolved, future version of Seth that reaches back through the architecture of time to guide his past self.
Right.
Well, if time is truly simultaneous, and we all create our own reality from a multidimensional framework,
Right.
then who is trying to talk to you right now?
Oh, wow. Is there a future you? A more evolved, peaceful, highly aware version of yourself, currently broadcasting a signal backward through time?
Trying to hand you the exact insight you need today, maybe telling you to relax about the car or to throw out that metaphorical negative pillow. That sudden intuitive hunch you had this morning, or that unexplained urge to take a different route to work. Maybe that is just your own personal Seth 2 knocking on the door of your mind.
We are all acting as channels, whether we consciously realize it or not.
So pay attention to the signals. Keep your inner climate clear. And who knows, maybe try to float a table this weekend. Or at least float your mood.
Exactly. Have fun with it. Experiment.
Well, good evening, everyone. And as Seth would undoubtedly say, my heartiest wishes to you both.
Good evening.